Hey everybody, my name is Paul Esden Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com, and welcome to Front Office View. I feel like, what's the not Price Right, Wheel of Fortune, right? The lady goes, aha, here we are. That's right, Front Office View. Here we are, baby, and we're with former NFL general manager Randy Mueller and former executive of the year and all the like. We're a week out from the NFL draft, Randy. Is that engine revving?
It definitely is. And like we talked about before the show started, I missed the process. The process for the last month and a half of an NFL franchise in honing in on one, individual players, but two, the strategy and the plan is something that I do miss. I love the collaboration of everybody in the building kind of working for a common goal. And let's face it, there is no bigger day in an NFL franchise than being able to acquire this amount of players. And really now it's over 3 days, but this window of opportunity, there's nothing more important that we do all year long, and we spend all year getting ready for it. So yeah, I think as the days tick off and teams come up with a plan, I think it's awesome to have our own plan, even though we don't have all the resources of an NFL team,
100%, which is a fun place where we're going to dive. No matter where you guys are watching, make sure you show your support. We're streaming live right now in several different places. Make sure you like the video, hit subscribe down below so you can tune into Front Office View every week. It is also part of the playlist, Front Office View, where every episode you guys can find as well if you guys would like to check it out. So without further ado, let's dive right into this puppy. And again, with us being a week out from the NFL draft, there will be a heavy focus, of course, specifically on NFL draft content. And we got to start from the top quarterbacks available in the 2023 NFL draft. Randy, you've had an opportunity to get in the film room, look at some of these top prospects, and we're going to continue, and we want to reiterate this message, the team building approach. And you mentioned that right off the top, Randy, that while we may not have the same resources available that each of the NFL teams do, we'd like to view it from that lens, that front office view. So one of the first ones I want to dive right into off the top is Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson. So he's been a guy that has been labeled raw, a guy that's going to take years to develop. And feel free whether you want to play fact or fiction on that, fun fact within itself. But it leads me to believe that if he is as raw as people say, and most teams need their first-round picks to cash in immediately and be immediate impact players to their team, does that kind of limit some of the places Anthony Richardson could go? Specifically, teams with multiple first-round picks, you would think they would have a little bit more luxury potentially to take a guy of this, nature in the draft. Is it that luxury style that you view from that perspective? Do you also see the same raw things that people are saying about him is going to take time to develop?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Paul, and I tend to agree with you. There's not many franchises that can afford to take a first-round pick and have him be a project or have him be not productive in the first year or two of taking him. And quarterback's really no different. We understand they have to sit and they have to learn and they have to process, and that does take time. And maybe the learning curve for that position is greater than most, but there's not many franchises that can do that. So you hit it right on the head. The teams that have multiple first round picks, and I'm not so sure it's not second round picks in the case of Anthony Richardson, but you have to have multiple picks so that you can still get value on the field this year, but yet kind of ice that other value as almost like a redshirt year. I think with regard to specifically Anthony Richardson, you can equate him to Malik Willis a year ago. There were all kinds of, evaluations on him that had him going anywhere from the top 3 picks to the end of the first round. None of the gurus on the media platforms thought he would be a third round pick. But having been a guy in that chair, when you select a player like that is maybe a year away from being a year away, that's a hard one because there's a lot of good, clean players that are going to have input right away that you pass on. And that's a hard pill to swallow. So you might be training this quarterback for the next staff if you don't get him pretty soon, if you follow me. So I think in Anthony Richardson's case, we see flashes. We see some things that say, hey, that's NFL arm talent. That's really elite athleticism. But to play the position of quarterback at the NFL level, you've got to do some other things. If you can't throw it accurately, I think that's a fatal flaw. If you can't process the information and have poise in the pocket to eventually beat teams from the pocket, because let's face it, defensive coordinators make you do that, I think that's a fatal flaw as well. So those are things that are going to take some time. I personally, and I'm not saying I'm right, I just couldn't take a bite of the Anthony Richardson apple early because of that. He may be a star, but guess what? He may not be. And I'll give you another example. When the 49ers moved up for Trey Lance a couple years ago, I personally said I couldn't do that. I respect their conviction that they have. I get it. They're very confident in their ability to evaluate quarterbacks. But having done this for the last 35 years in the NFL, I just couldn't have done that. There's just not enough body of work and not enough positives on that body of work for me to give away 2 years drafts and move up to select a guy who had very few throws at the collegiate level. I kind of see that with Anthony Richardson too. That's really hard. Now somebody's going to pick him. I don't have any doubt about it. Mm-hmm. I'm not convinced it's going to be a first round pick, but at some point he'll be on a team. Time will tell. And I'm not just disparaging, if that's even a word, the player at all. I get it.
Yeah.
He is what he is. I see the positives, but as a team builder, and you mentioned team building, it's not as easy when you can pass on a healthy, really good player who's going to contribute right away to take a project like that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful transition to where I want to go because, again, you mentioned the bite of the apple. I think that's a great way to put it for certain teams that will be willing to and certain teams that won't be, which transitions us to Bryce Young here because, again, we've said this a few times, but, I'm a guy that likes to let things marinate a little bit. Let's let it simmer just so you guys can really enjoy and savor the flavor here. A quarterback of Bryce Young's height and weight combination has never, Never, ever been drafted in the first round, let alone, like people are saying, and the betting odds believe he will be the number 1 overall pick, not even a first rounder. So The fact of the matter is, as a GM here, Randy, and some of your previous stops here, were you ever willing to be the first to ever do something? Because coming off of Anthony Richardson, which is fascinating, it almost seems like an easier sell job. Because, again, I think all you people, and I say you people as general managers, guys that have been in that elite seat, not a lot of people have been in that realm, but I would assume that a big part of the job is confidence. You have to have conviction in your own picks, regardless of what anyone else says on the outside. So with that mentality, you're not going to be thinking like this. But if you take Anthony Richardson and he flops, if I was the GM, I turn ownership. Well, look at the guy. He was 240 pounds, the rocket arm. I saw it all. It just didn't happen. That seems like an easier sell job if it fails. If Bryce Young fails, I'm going to turn to ownership. They're like, a quarterback of his height and weight was never drafted ever. You're an idiot. You're fired. I'm like, son of a, okay, I'm fired. Does that factor in? Does that make sense what I'm saying, Randy, in terms of, again, where you're willing to invest and reach? Even if Bryce Young is really good, it's never happened before. That seems like a real big bite of that apple that I don't think a lot of teams are willing to take.
I think you're correct in that it does involve ownership and the decision itself. And we're going to find out in Carolina's case.
Yeah.
Their owner, David Tepper, seems to me like, just my opinion, he may be involved a lot. And if that's the case, he's going to have sat with these guys. He's going to have to heard the pros and the cons. And if he's willing to sign off on it, it makes it easier to select a kid like Bryce Young, because like you said, he's not an outlier. He's an outlier forever for the 80 years of the draft. And I've been around for 40 of them and involved in 40 of them. And I don't know that I could do it, but it would help if the owner was willing to say, hey, I understand. We're making a stand here that nobody else has ever made. It's never been done in the history of the game. If he's willing to buy off on that and sign it, it does make it easier to pick him. I think a lot of times it comes down to options and what your other options are. In this case, for me, I happen to think CJ Stroud is really good and a viable option for a team that really needs and values a quarterback. So I look at those two guys side by side. One is 6'3", one is 215 pounds. Both can make all the throws. Both to me seem like they can process information. I'll say this, and we don't know this, and only the NFL teams do know this. When they bring guys in for interviews and for visits, they get to spend a lot of time with them. And let's just trust the NFL team to maybe have more information than we do. They gather intel on these players. Sometimes people interview good. Sometimes guys interview bad. Not necessarily a reflection of how they're going to play, but it's part of the process and has to be considered. And I'm not saying anything bad about CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or any of these players, but the NFL teams know who interviews good. They got them on the board, who can learn the best, how they learn, and maybe there's something there that sways them. Maybe there is some medical information that we don't know about, and some character stuff that we don't know about. So if I'm just looking on film, I tend to like CJ Stroud because of all the reasons we've talked about. There may be some other intangible stuff that we're not aware of, where he did not excel in, or that Bryce Young, if it was a race, lapped him in. So there's some balls in the air here that we as outside analysts don't know.
Yeah, and there always is, and that's part of the process that we just have to accept as we're evaluating some of this. Randy, I'm going to be honest. I don't know how long we've been doing the show. I haven't been keeping. I don't have a person in the back going episode 235. I don't have someone back there doing it. But Randy, I'm going to be honest. Before I even ask this question, I will preface it by saying this may be the dumbest question in the history of this program that I've ever asked you, but I'm going to dip my toe in the water anyway, just to see what the temperature feels like.
Gotcha.
This is something fans talk about all the time. And this is kind of a cool concept because obviously you've been in the GM chair before. And sometimes when fans hear something, they're like, I wonder if a GM would really consider something like this. So I'm going to throw it to you. Fans all the time talk about the success or lack thereof from a certain school in the draft. And that clouds their judgment as they're evaluating a player. A very easy example is Ohio State quarterbacks. When you look at the history of J.T. Barrett, Dwayne Haskins, God rest his soul, or whoever a bunch of these guys are, Troy Smith, whoever, they have not been able to translate to the NFL level. And fans go, well, Ohio State can't crank out quarterbacks. So you got to think twice about taking an Ohio State guy. We just mentioned how great CJ Stroud looks. And then there's stuff on the other side where it's great. Iowa offensive linemen. Oh, you draft those guys. The way they trade them, they feed them, and they bring them up. They're going to be great. Does any of those kind of things ever enter your mind, or is that just made up media fanfare, fan-driven stuff, media stuff we talk about on television shows, and that has no bearing whatsoever when we get to draft day? What are your thoughts? Again, prefaced in, maybe the dumbest question you've ever been asked in your life, Randy.
I'm going to say this. It's clearly not the dumbest question I've ever been asked. I'm giving you credit, Paul. You're not a dumb question. It does get asked a lot. And a lot of times and I would take criticism 20 years in Seattle. You guys never draft Huskies. You never draft Washington guys. What's the problem? Yeah. So it is a fandom question from the most part. And that's where the doubts come from. But those are agenda-driven questions, if you follow me, because a certain group of fans follows them. I would say this: the schemes matter, the school doesn't. Coaching matters a lot, and it matters a lot at the collegiate level. And you mentioned Iowa offensive linemen. They've always been, since Coach Ferentz has been there, really well coached, really well schooled, really well drilled. And guess what? They're pretty good because of it. It's like getting a defensive player from Nick Saban at Alabama. Right. I know all of that. I know they've been tested in every way. They've been coached hard. They have thick skin, and they can take criticism. And guess what? They've all improved, or they've been shipped out of Alabama. So
that's true.
The school matters, but probably not for the reason you're talking about. I'll say this also about Ohio State quarterbacks. I think I could connect dots to the ones that have failed for reasons other than they went to Ohio State. So I don't know that there's a lot to that. Sometimes if a system or scheme has been in place for a long time, and for example, certain quarterbacks have come through there, that may have a little bit to do with what they get asked to do at the pro level, not matching up to what they get asked to do there. So that's why I say schemes matter. So coaching and schemes matter. It's never really been a detriment to me selecting a player, whether he went here or there. Now, the level of competition always matters. I think it's easier to select a player in a lot of cases from Ohio State than from Ohio U per se. So and I'm not slapping Ohio U.
I got you.
Different caliber.
Yeah, of course.
So you have conversations like that. Competition matters. Level of practice, quality reps matter, and you'll get that at the best programs. At Alabama, sometimes practice is tougher than games. At Ohio State, sometimes practice, they kick your butt in practice, and then we go play somebody at somewhere else, and it's not quite the same. So practice matters. And I think that all is part of an equation when you're trying to solve where you end up on that player in your board and in your process.
All right. So not the dumbest question Randy's ever been
no
asked.
Doubt.
The rest of the show is gravy. It's all whatever else happens.
Just take a deep breath. You're good. You're on scholarship from here on in.
That's right. That's the exact way that I look at it. Let's get one more quarterback question here. Will Levis, another polarizing guy during this pre-draft process. A lot of people, when you look at 2021 for Kentucky, they love what they saw on tape. But in 2022, he had less talent around him and he struggled. Is it simple to make excuses sometimes for these guys? And when is it legitimate and when is it not? Because I'm sure that things that you guys want to see when you're making decisions or drafting guys is accountability. Like, okay, all these things went wrong, but are you saying, look at, like, if Will Levis came in the room and said, yeah, the rest of my room sucked. No wonder I suck. I don't know if I'm an NFL team and I heard that. I'm like, way to point the finger, pal. Like, I want a leader and all these other things from the quarterback room. So how do you kind of dissect that very fine line, it seems, between like accountability, proven production? Oh, he would have been good. Like Mel Kiper, he is a loud advocate for Will Levis, and he points and he tries to excuse out. I don't want to say in a bad way. I love Mel Kiper, but he said all the bad things that happened last year are because of these obvious deficiencies with the rest of the roster, and he didn't say that was for Will Levis. Other people think that's just Will Levis not being good enough to overcome it. What say you, Randy?
Yeah, I think it's a valid concern. It's a valid conversation. I think in the case of Will Levis, there are things that I see physically that I can't blame on having receivers that are lesser talented than the prior year. I go back to the Josh Allen story at Wyoming.
Of course.
I mean, he's playing with neighbor kids sometimes, and and so I'm not going to hold that against him. I see balls that bounced off chests. I see balls that were catchable. So I didn't really question that the kid, and I'm talking about Josh Allen, couldn't put the ball on the money where you wanted it. I think in Will Levis's case, for me, I saw overthrows, I saw misses, I saw, swings and misses at some easier throws that I don't care who the receiver is. It could have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and he wouldn't have caught the ball sometimes. So yeah. So I think you can see on tape what you need to see, and you can equate talent sometimes to a level of production, but I also think you can identify skill sets and traits, and if a guy can do it or not based on whoever is running out there for passes and however things are being blocked, you can handle that. So I'm with you. I love Mel. I'm not sure I can agree with his theory and thinking on Will Levis. I see a guy in Will Levis that is really smart, 4.0, book smart, that same processing ability doesn't carry over onto the football field sometimes. I see some questionable decisions, and he's played a lot of football now. It's not like he has 4 or 5 starts. He's played a lot, and I haven't seen the progression to get to where he's going to have to be in the NFL. So decision-making and accuracy for me are 2 flaws that if you don't have, you can talk about projecting and getting better and how long he takes to get some of these things ironed out to play at the NFL level. I'm not sure it's ever going to happen. So that for me is flaws that I have a hard time thinking he's going to be able to overcome.
All right, let's move to another category here, the top pass catchers. We're going to combine them here, and you'll understand why once we start going through some of these topics, and that is tight ends, wide receivers, and in particular, I'm curious about the tight end class, because if NFL people think that this wide receiver class isn't as good, and that's the narrative in social media and show-driven world, they do not think the wide receiver class is as great as it's been in past years. And if that's true, do you think that, like, the tight end class, which people think is really deep and great, could tight ends be potentially drafted higher than some of these wide receivers? But what the team sells as well, it's a pass catcher. If the tight end is a little bit better than the receiver, I'm not going to force the receiver peg simply because we need a receiver. If we could bring in a tight end to be that pass catcher, maybe that could fill the void. Does that make sense from a team building perspective? Is that kind of off base?
No, it's a great question, and I think you're on point. I couldn't agree more, and most of the time I don't agree with the rank and file on the outside evaluators, but I do in the case of the receiver batch this year. For me, my top receiver is a kid from Tennessee, Jalen Hyatt, who really compares a year ago to Jameson Williams, the kid that Detroit picked. Yeah. Now, he was picked, 12, 13,
12. Yeah, they traded up in the first round.
Somewhere in there. So that's where I could see a receiver falling this year. Last year, what was he, the 3rd or 4th receiver taken?
That's right, because Garrett Wilson went 10. 11 was the New Orleans moving up for Chris Olave, and I think Jameson was the 3rd one in a row.
Well, Atlanta had already picked the kid from USC.
Oh, Drake London, you're right. So that's a 4th in a row.
So he's the 4th pick. Yeah. So that gives people, I think, an indication of the depth or lack thereof at receiver. It just so happens that this year, as you mentioned, it is a pretty good group of tight ends, and I shouldn't say pretty good. It's outstanding for pass-catching tight ends.
Wow.
And so I think I'm sure DraftKings already has this or whoever else makes these bets, Paul, but is a tight end going to get picked ahead of a receiver? That's one that would be a pretty good discussion, because I think Dalton Kincaid from Utah is going to be picked before a receiver gets picked. He's that good for me. And you're right on. He is a pass catching weapon who can do it from multiple levels, from the slot, from the tight end spot, from split wide, from the backfield. I don't care. He's a matchup. And I'm not a tight end drafter, right? I think those guys are bells and whistles. They're not the meat and potatoes. So I always say, let's get a meat and potatoes guy when we're picking in the first round. And there's a couple more like that, but I'll just stay on the Dalton Kincaid bandwagon. This kid runs, he catches, he gets open. He's not going to have to be schemed open. He beats one-on-one coverage. He'll be a threat on third downs and in the red zone. I can't say that about many wide receivers this year at all. So I'm with you. I think as a team builder, I would consider a tight end this year, and that's a one-off. That normally doesn't happen, over picking a receiver. And I like Hyatt, but there are other receivers that I think have flies or flaws that I could not even consider before 2 or 3 of these tight ends. So I think it will be a year that we see tight ends get picked more prevalently and are being considered at a higher level than normal drafts have shown in the past.
Interesting. Yeah, I was trying to look up the betting real quick. I won't be able to get that number beforehand, but yeah, that would be. Look, Randy, I'm just going to be blunt. I think we're looking at each other. We're both ready to retire. Let's get some money. Let's bet some money. Let's win enough money, and we're retiring. We're going to Cabo. That's where the front office will be from this point moving forward. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. So that is a juicy bet. We'll have to wait to get those official odds in a little bit here, but I like where your head's at. I like the cut of your jib there, Randy. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
As it comes with this class, I could really see that, and that to me is tantalizing.
The tight ends that I have seen this year, Paul, beyond Kincaid as well, are really good too. There's some special ones that you know, I don't know when or if we're going to talk about some of these tight ends, but the tight end from Georgia, Darnell Washington, is as freakish as I've ever seen, and I've been doing this a long time.
Wow.
I've never seen somebody that can do what he can do at the size he does it. You know, he's almost 6'7", he weighs 265 pounds, he runs 4'6", but he runs like a deer with body control. And if he wants to just flat run over a defensive back, guess what? He's going to just run over him. They can't tackle him. So this guy has 45 career catches. That is it. So the offense at Georgia couldn't have limited him more or reduced his opportunities. At the pro level, this guy's going to be a focal point of a passing game, in my opinion, and he's going to kick ass as an end-of-the-line blocker. So, I mean, these two guys, whether it's Kincaid at Utah or Washington from Georgia, I'm even recommending a kid at Oregon State that's played 2 games this year that I think will be a star in the NFL too, Luke Musgrave. So there's plenty of tight end talent to supplement the lack of talent at the wide receiver spot. It's not just the one guy.
I love that. And of course, I got to give a shout out to my father, who's a diehard Notre Dame fan, a Golden Domer, Michael Mayer, baby. I saw him, unfortunately, give Syracuse the business when Syracuse and Notre Dame played here in the Dome this past fall that my father flew in for to see. But Michael Mayer, again, the complete old school tight end. He just, again, I'm not quite sure it's Jason Witten vibes, but man, he just has a little bit of everything, which it really intrigues me. So he's
no doubt about it. Yeah, he would be 4th on my list, and in a normal draft, he might be 1st. He is the Jason Witten, even maybe more. I see him as a Mark Bavaro, a guy with power to block enough, but he's not the elite athlete that these other guys are.
Right.
And so this game, and this is a good, I guess, subject, the game has changed enough over the last 15 years, especially, that's become a 7-on-7 league. It is passing, it is covering, it is throwing, catching. And that's why these tight ends are now elevated. And probably the biggest area of change that we've undergone is the fact that it's open. The game has been opened. The rules have been opened to the point where now these receivers that aren't great blockers can all excel. And a guy like Mike Mayer gets pushed down. 10 years ago, he'd have been a top 10 pick, in my opinion. Now there's just so many other options that, he probably gets pushed down a little bit, but he's a really good player too. So don't tell your dad that, don't have him jump off any bridges. Your dad will be okay, because he'll be watching Mike Mayer on Sundays too.
I love that. All right, Randy, let me get into this one. This one's a weird question. I'm not even really sure where it goes. So you believe the tight end class is deep, and a lot of really well-respected analysts do. Will that mean that some teams say to themselves, well, it's deep, we can wait at tight end? Or is it the reverse? Oh my goodness, this is deep and good, but we need to get our Kincaid. We need to rush to get our Washington. We need to get them as soon as possible because someone else is going to get them. Which side do you lean if you had to pick one in terms of that tight end evaluation as we're heading there to the 2023 NFL draft next week?
I think there's 4 or 5, Paul, that are pretty special.
Mhm.
Beyond that, I think it becomes a normal NFL tight end draft. So if I wanted a tight end and needed a tight end, I wouldn't wait around too long. And I think by the time this draft is settled in most NFL scouting offices, they're going to find that it's probably a 12, 15 player top end draft. And after that, you might see the second tight end, the third tight end, the fourth tight end. Those guys come off later in the first round. And so I don't think it's an extremely deep draft. I think and we're going to talk about the offensive line here coming up, not in another area that I don't think is very deep. There's some lacking at other positions that are going to dig into the depth of this draft. So if I needed a tight end, I wouldn't hang around and think I'm going to get one in the 4th or 5th round. That's for sure.
All right. Well, let's keep going on the pass catchers. And I've heard a few people describe it in this question. I'm curious if you're in the same ballpark here. A few people that I really respect in the business have described this wide receiver class, even though it may not be as great overall as it has been the past couple. We've had a lot of really good receivers go. Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase among those that have come in. They've described this wide receiver class as like an ice cream shop where you just pick your favorite flavor depending on your taste, and a taste of, I'm making this up, but the Baltimore Ravens to the New York Giants, they could both need a receiver, but their taste, their desires are much different between the two. So maybe they're looking at different people. Let me ask you, from what you've seen on film, what you've studied about these wide receivers, do you share that same perception of this class?
Definitely. I think teams will get to select their favorite flavor. My downside to that is I want guys that can run, and there's a lot of effective receivers at the collegiate ranks this year, not a lot of them that can run. And so they've kind of weeded themselves out for me, that the top end ones, the Jalen Hyatt, the Jordan Addison from USC, those guys kind of jump out at me because of their speed. The other guys that are for me, and I know most people have the Ohio State kid, Jackson Smith, Nibja as the top guy. I got to have guys that can run, Paul. I'm sorry. And the slot receivers like Zay Flowers, even Quentin Johnson from TCU, who's a big dude who can run, but a little raw, a little inconsistent catching. I see more of the glass being, I won't say half empty, but you've got to fit those guys in with your scheme. A couple guys at the top, Addison, Hyatt, those guys can fit in right now to any scheme. But after that, then you're correct in that you've got to fit some of these other receivers in, not as much as the flavor you want, but the skill set that you may be lacking. You may draft another fast kid that's really raw that I have as my 6th or 7th guy on my board, just because I need to take the top off defenses. And I would rather have that than a possession slot receiver like the Ohio State kid. So I may give up some things for that reason, but I am filling out my skill set that I'm building within my team. So I think your point is it can go both ways. I know this, and this has been the case for all the times I've been in the NFL. Fast guys get drafted early, Paul. They're going to get drafted early. That's not, Randy Mueller thinking up a new theory. Trust me. This is true for years and years. So if you can run fast, there's a good chance you're going to get picked before those guys with average speed, because we can find average speed. We can find, in most cases, slot receivers, things like that in the 3rd or 4th round, or even 2nd or 3rd round. What you can't find is guys that make defenses have to defend you differently. And that's what speed does to the game.
I love that. All right, you answered it a little bit on the back end there, but it's another one of these kind of fan-driven questions that people think about sometimes. Do teams like to build their wide receiver room like a basketball team and have a point guard, have a power forward, have a big guy, have a small fast guy, and try to have as many, we brought up the ice cream analogy, a lot of different flavors in the room, and then you could attack defenses in a lot of different ways? Or is it just much more simpler than that? Football teams are like, I don't give a flying hoot whether you're 7'12" or 4'2" put 2. We just want as many really good, talented receivers in the room. We don't care about the flavors. Where do we stand there, or is there really a tried true answer for a question like this?
I think it depends on the decision makers and their philosophy, to be honest with you. And I've said it, I couldn't consider certain players because they just don't run fast enough for what I want. But I've also had players on my team that I know can't run that are very productive. So there are times when I would look to fill a skill set that we're missing. But my criteria itself is really across the board when it comes to drafting receivers or finding receivers. You may find a particular player who has a really detailed skill set that you can get from another team in free agency, or that you can draft later that you fit in. That's a possibility. But I do think every criteria for NFL front offices for receiver is a little different based on your scheme, based on your coach's philosophy, and based on what you want to build as a 53-man roster. So I don't know if that's jumping around your answer, but I think it's a little bit of both. I would apply our criteria for the most part across the board. And within that criteria, you have to prioritize 1 through 5. What are the most important things? Maybe speed isn't at the top of other teams' list. Maybe it's body control. Maybe it's getting away from press coverage. Maybe it's he's got to catch everything. He's got to catch when he's covered. I'll say this. I've always thought being able to catch when you're covered is a vital criteria for a position, especially wide receiver and tight end at the NFL level. Because guess what? They cover you. Guys cover you in the NFL. And sometimes the fastest guys get covered. So the great ones for me are the guys that can run fast, but can also catch when you're covered. Like Stephon Diggs or like, these guys that are at the top of the game right now. These guys are all guys that can run, catch when they're covered. And those are the top criteria for me.
And that makes a lot of sense, again, as you're evaluating. And as you said, I mean, at the end of the day, sure, you can catch it wide open. Yeah, you all should be able to. The physically contested catches where we're getting in traffic, Justin Jeffersons of the world, like, wow, that's where you could stand out a bit. And also I remember Golden Tate back in the day. You used to have the mitts.
Yeah.
You just had those great hands and those kind of situations. Go ahead, Randy.
We always add to that point, and this is kind of in a joking fashion when we're sitting around the scouting room, guys will say, yeah, he can catch when he's covered. And another guy might say, yeah, because he's always covered. He can't get away from anybody. So these things go back and forth as scouts and as part of the process that everybody's pitching in their 2 cents on how to evaluate. And there's probably a little bit of truth on both sides of that coin. You are in traffic a lot less if you can run fast.
Yeah, that's 100%. I love the jabbing. We've gotten a little bit of that where we've been doing some of these draft shows coming up at because people, I'll have favorites. Another coach will have favorites, and as we're kind of building them up, they're like, yeah, it's because he can't separate, but okay.
He can't run
my
out
guy
in 3 days.
Never has the situations. He's too damn fast. So I was like, hey, good point, I guess. So, that's funny how that can work. So let's get into another flavor here. Come on, the hog mollies, baby. A little trench warfare. The big nasties here on the offensive line. And I'm going to ask you this straight up, Randy. What do you value more? An offensive lineman that may appear to be a jack of all trades, he could play all over the place, potentially a master of none, or a player that has proven he can play one position at a really high level, really good. And if we're going to use straight up examples from this draft that seem to fit those categories, on a perception standpoint, Broderick Jones out of Georgia is a left tackle guy. Now, Mel Kiper and some others say maybe he can flip to the right side. Peter Skoronski came in as a center. He went over to left tackle. People believe he's going to be a guard at the next level. So those are kind of the 2 examples potentially if you want to view it in that light. But just kind of in a general sense, which one do you value more? Because I feel like, there may be different kinds of answers here to this kind of question.
Yeah, I think it's a little of both in that you're going to need both kinds and both makeups on your team for sure. I think what I value most, and I don't think this is any different from most NFL evaluators, I probably value the ability to play tackle on a down by down basis more than anything else. So I'm looking for a skill set at tackle with length, with enough anchor, and with some ability to balance and recover. And those are really, fatal flaws if you don't have those to play tackle at the NFL level. So I've heard a lot of the reports on Skoronski. You mentioned Broderick Jones. I happen to like that ability to play tackle. The left and right stuff doesn't really bother me. I think if you can play left, you can play right. Maybe not quite as easy to go from right to left, but I think that sometimes gets a little too much into the weeds as well. I think sometimes tackle is tackle at the NFL level. It's not like you're protecting the blind side all the time now with defenses moving around
True.
and doing all kinds of crazy things, blitz and pressure package wise. You've got to be able to protect the edge. That's the bottom line. So I think and this is an interesting draft for that, because I think in Stroud, you've got a guy that plays everywhere. You've got another guy at Wisconsin, Tippeman, who's almost 6'7" center.
Crazy.
Not really what I'm looking for from a leverage standpoint and an anchor standpoint in there. So there are some project and some projections for players that aren't playing what they're asked to do in college at the pro level. That bothers me a little bit. But I'm looking, and this is my theory, I'm looking to draft tackles.
Okay.
I'm looking to probably sign a veteran center, because you see every year the best centers for years got picked at the top of the second round. And it's not because they weren't really good players. It's because you're turning over a whole offensive line and a system and making the calls to a rookie, and nobody really wants to do that. So that's why I say I'd rather have a veteran, that I'd rather sign a center, and I will fill in at guard somehow, some way with guys that fit the criteria we want. That's just in a brief, simplistic way of how I would try to build an offensive line. I think tackles are the hardest thing to find. They're the hardest thing to get your hands on and to keep. And they are the one impact position up there that have to exist on their own, on the edges. And you've got to be able to keep the quarterback upright, or you have no chance in this league. So that's why, for me, I'm going to draft tackles almost all the time over guards. Now, it's helpful if a guy played tackle in college, even though you're going to move him to guard. I think it is helpful. I've done that a couple times. We did it with Pete Kendall years ago in Seattle. He was a tackle at Boston College. We moved him to guard. The idea of being able to temporarily, when a guy goes down in the middle of a drive, say, I got it, I'm going to move right to right tackle, and he's playing left guard, that is a skill. And it's a security blanket for not only the guys in the huddle, but for the guys upstairs too, that you have a guy like a Skoronski that could play anywhere in any one drive. I mean, you could literally say this guy could get you out of a game, but he could get you out of a drive at center, at guard, at tackle. So that's value to me. So that's why I think you're going to see guys get drafted, even though their one position that they play might not warrant, being the 12th pick in the first round. But that versatility that you mentioned, you're going to look for that. So I'm kind of around your question, because I started by saying I think you need all those guys. It depends a little bit how many positions they can play at the NFL level before you stick a value of this is what this guy is on him.
I will say this, Randy, if this gig doesn't work out for you, again, political office perhaps, with your GM ability, hey, Randy, what are you going to be doing with the 5th overall pick? And then you're like, well, there's a lot of things I could do. I could do this. And back to you, Jeff. I'm like, wait, hey, Johnny, did he answer the question? Or what? Very nice work there. And by the way, let's pour one out for Pete Kendall. 3 years with the Jets in the mid-2000s. Yes, our boy Pete Kendall. I love that deep cut. Very nice job there.
Probably it might have been, Paul, my first-round pick when I was in charge in Seattle. Joey Galloway, we were back-to-back in years. I can't remember which, if it was Joey first or Pete next, but two awesome guys, awesome players. And I think we'd all be, lucky to have those kind of guys in the draft this year even as well.
100%. There's no doubt about that. You've answered this a little bit, but I do want to reestablish it. Why is the center position devalued? If you look at history over the last 3 years, only 2 centers have been taken in the first round. There was Tyler Linderbaum, 25th to the Baltimore Ravens, and 2 years past that was Cesar Ruiz, who went 24th overall to the New Orleans Saints. Again, on paper, I'm just being a simplistic guy here. Centers seem very important to some of the things you said. Making protection calls, that quarterback-center relationship is vitally important in the NFL, but yet it's not being viewed that way, at least from the NFL level. Only 2 guys in the first round over the last 3 years. Randy, what's the deal here?
I think they're hard to find, for one thing. It is a really hard job, and there's not many of that can do it at the highest level. And it's different when you get to the NFL because you do call protections. You do change everything on the fly. It is a processing job as much as anything. And it's hard to relate that in college. A lot of times they don't ask them to do what you're going to ask them to do at the NFL level. For whatever reason, there hasn't been a lot of great centers. And I think, I drafted a couple of them. I was involved in Seattle when we drafted Kevin Y, another Jet. We drafted LeCharles Bentley when I was in New Orleans, and he was a really good center, probably the best one I ever evaluated in college. A powerful dude who we played all of these guys, Kevin Mawai, we played Charles Bentley. We played him at guard for a year or two before they then moved into center. So there's a process there that I think has to happen. They have to learn the NFL game before they become a full-fledged, really functional center. That's why I said I'm not opposed to paying some money and signing a center who has been around and has been with another team or two. Even if his play time is limited, his exposure to everything he's going to see, I think that's good money spent. So that's just a personal philosophy. I'm going to draft tackles. I'm going to go sign a veteran center, and I'm going to fill in at guard somehow, some way as just a guide to put your offensive line together.
Yeah, let's do another value question there. You just kind of mentioned it with guards. I hear people all this time from former GMs to head coaches and everything. And then when I say, what about guard? And they're like, we can find one of those later in the draft. We'll figure it out. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you'll figure it out? Like, you need two of them on the football field to protect your quarterback. What is it with guards that every time I ask this question to somebody, they're like, we'll figure it out?
I just think it's a position where those of us as team builders view it as a spot where we can get them help. They're never going to be really on an island. They're never going to cost you a game if they're mistake prone or do something really silly. I just think you can get them help from a center, help from a tackle, vice versa. A lot of times if the guards are covered, somebody else can help them. So it's just a position that, again, I'm not down on guards. Say John Hanna was a great player. I get it. He's in the Hall of Fame. But, I think you can't pay everybody. You can't select everybody in the first round. So I do think fullbacks, guards, sometimes safeties, sometimes inside linebackers get devalued a little bit just because of the basics of the position. That's all. And I've always felt like, and again, I'd draft a really good guard, no problem, if it were in the first or second round. But I've also been around where we drafted one in the fifth or sixth round and turned him into a really good guard too. So that's why I say I think you can get guards. I think you can find guards without having to spend top collateral to get them on your team.
All right. Well, I'm just glad that I'm not a guard because Randy's not like, I'm out for 1 week. We'll just find somebody. I appreciate that.
I'm going to hear from Pete Kendall and all these guys when I hang up. They're going to.
That's 100%. Look forward to those calls that are coming in. No doubt about that. Shout out to Elijah Tucker, our guard on the New York Jets. Thank you to Seattle, which has all these Seattle Jet connections. Thank you for that first round pick and the Jamal Adams deal. But that's neither here nor there. We end the show the same way every week, emptying the GM notebook. Random quick hitting nuggets from the week that may have caught your eye, Randy. And let's go to a couple of things here. First off, one of the really interesting ones is Tua, who was transparent, and a lot of players aren't. When you get to the podium, they just kind of give these politically correct answers. But Tua, the Miami Dolphins quarterback, admitted during a presser this week that he seriously explored retirement. And, that obviously has to affect the Dolphins' decision-making here. And with the fifth-year option, apparently they did plan on exercising. That was supposed to, the decision coming in May, but you can make it early, and they did, apparently. Man, what do you make from that, from your team-building process? All of a sudden, your quarterback goes, I was considering retirement. Whoa, that's a red flag.
Yeah, no, in fact, I tweeted that out this morning, Paul, and the response was pretty much unanimous in that would affect if I were to sign him long-term or not. And I can really appreciate this kid's transparency and his honesty. That's exactly what he is. But from a business standpoint, if I were Chris Greer, and not that he didn't know this already, but the fact that he contemplated retirement would be an issue for me. I worry about him and his health because he's not a big guy. I mean, we talked about Bryce Young. That's the one thing I worry about with Bryce Young is something like this where he gets ragdolled around and banged in the head. And everybody says it's all fun and games till you got to wear an eye patch. And I understand it. It's just a tough spot to put these smaller framed guys in. So I would have questions about Tua. I had these questions about him coming out. Some of it's come to fruition now. From a business standpoint, it would be hard for me to give a whole bunch of money to a guy who had contemplated retirement and that might be one concussion away from doing so. So I thought it was something that is worth mentioning and talking about. And I think puts the Dolphins in a tough spot going forward for sure, because let's say you do sign him and he gets hurt. Everybody says, well, history is the best indicator of future, right? And look what has happened. So I don't know that they're in a win-win situation. I think it's kind of a tough spot to put the Dolphins in. And I know they knew this when they picked him, but things kind of went south last year. So we'll see how it goes. To their credit, though, They signed your Jets quarterback,
They
White.
did. Mike
That
White.
Mike White, I think, is an NFL quarterback. And so I have no doubt that they feel good about that position, even though Tua has some durability issues. I think they feel better about it this year than they did with Teddy Bridgewater. I just think they're in a better position now to deal with it.
All right. Again, Randy gives Mike White the stamp of approval. And with Tua's injury history, we may be seeing Mike White QB1 at some random point during 2023. If you were a betting man, you may have to put your eggs in that basket. Let's stay at quarterback real quick. Just a quick detour to the quarterback draft. Adam Schefter tweeted out this week, and that went viral, is that he believes his quarterback run that people have kept banging our heads over about, that quarterbacks could go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, something crazy. Adam Schefter says, well, hold your horses, my friends. He doesn't believe that quarterback run will truly start until Indianapolis at 4. He believes the quarterback will be taken at 1, but this assumption that it's happening at 2 with Houston or someone will trade up for 3 with Arizona is he's not sure he's buying what that report is. What do you make of that, Randy, and what that could mean? And as our great guy Chris Licata, who works behind the scenes, noted, Adam Schefter and Bryce Young share the same agency. Interesting.
Yeah. I saw that. That is an interesting one for me because I have said all along, Paul, to myself, maybe no one's listening, that I did not think there was going to be a run on quarterbacks. There was a time when all the gurus are saying there's going to be 3 or 4 quarterbacks picked in the top 5. I don't see that. I don't see any way that happens. And it would not surprise me if only one quarterback got picked in the top 5. I don't know what the Colts are going to do. I don't think they're going to just pick any quarterback. I think they may have their eye on one. I'm not sure it's Bryce Young. It could be CJ Stroud. But I just don't think there's going to be the run on quarterbacks in general that most of the prognosticators have called for. So I guess I'm with Adam on this case. But having said that, I don't believe a team would ever tell a player ahead of time, we're going to pick you at number 1. There'd be no reason to. And I was asked this on a couple of radio shows this week, and I said, yeah, I've never done that. I don't know why you do it. First off, I've never picked number 1, thank goodness. But I would never tell somebody that, hey, we're going to pick you, at any point, because the options change. Everything's fluid. Every day something new comes up. Plus, I just want to keep my options to ourselves in case something different happens that we want to change. So I'm probably with Adam on this one. I don't know who the favorite is to go. Again, it comes down to the flavor you pick. We've discussed why, pros and cons. I don't know. I think it's a different draft in that every year it seems like we want to run quarterbacks up for whatever reason. Maybe it's to produce a narrative. Maybe it's to push the excitement level because we all know it's a quarterback league. And I've said last year, and I'm kind of saying the same this year, I just don't see the quality of NFL starting quarterbacks that everybody else sees. So maybe I'm all wet. And I will say this, it doesn't really matter when they get drafted. For me, that's not validation of, oh, we were right. Let's just wait till they play, okay? Let's wait till all these guys play. And that happens year in and year out, and we want to validate our claims of wherever, whatever. Let's just have a little patience and see who plays the best and who gets developed the quickest. These teams are usually not very good at the top that are picking these quarterbacks, so it takes some time for sure.
I love that. All right, let's go to, we don't have any homecoming music here, but Allen Robinson's finally on the move. He goes from the LA Rams to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Of course, Allen Robinson playing his football at Penn State in college. What do you make of the move? It seems low risk, high reward for the folks over in Pittsburgh.
I think the Steelers have done a better job in drafting and developing receivers than any franchise in the league.
Oh, yes.
So I will take it from their standpoint in that I think it's a steal for them. They're getting a really good receiver who a couple years ago in Chicago was one of the better receivers in the league. Fell on an injury his last year there. For whatever reason, didn't work out in LA. They paid him a ton of money. I don't understand it from the Rams standpoint other than they're just rebuilding and must have a cash printing machine in the back room because they print more cash and flush it than any team I've ever seen. But if I'm the Steelers, I think it's a great move. And it's another weapon. It's an upgrade from what we have as a group at receiver. I love the move. I think they could rekindle his career. And I think he'll be a great weapon for Kenny Pickett, who I think is an NFL quarterback. So I think the Steelers may have pulled the wool over everybody's eyes for next to nothing, get a good player. And then to get his salary, they're going to pay $10 million. The Rams are, they're going to pay $5 million. Yeah. With the Steelers. So that's a pretty good deal. And I think the Steelers, kudos to them for making the move.
Yeah, for a swap of 7th-round picks. What the hell is going on out there in LA?
Cup of coffee, baby. Cup of coffee. That's it.
Apparently. Yep. And let's go to the final one here. Apparently, everyone wants out of Arizona.
Yeah.
Again, Randy, if we end up, winning on all your wonderful draft prop bets you've dropped in here, we end up retiring. We're not moving to Arizona because everyone apparently wants out of Arizona. So Budda Baker now joins that list. Hopkins apparently doesn't want to be there. What the heck is going on out there? What did you say with all these people wanting to get out?
Well, Budda Baker is the heart and soul of the team in Arizona, has been. This kid is a salt of the earth, competitive dude who wants nothing of any issues, just wants to win. And if you watched any of Hard Knocks last year in season, you would see that this kid is for real. He is a legitimate dude that you want running your team and in your locker room. And when he goes public with something like this, and I know Monty Austinfort, great guy, got his hands full in Arizona right now with all the issues that are happening with them. I think this is Budda throwing up his hands and saying, enough of the circus. I've just had enough of this, whether it was the Kyler Murray stuff, the contract stuff, the Cliff Kingsbury stuff, the lawsuit now that's being brought by a former employee against the owner. I think he's just had enough. And I would have hoped that they had this discussion behind closed doors, but the fact that it didn't and it became public, for me, is really a red flag in that, like you said, turn out the lights when you leave town because everybody's on their way out and they cannot wait to get out of there. And I feel bad for the employees of the Cardinals, especially when you're trying to change the culture, whether it's Jonathan Gannon or Monty Austinfort. They've got their hands full there, and that's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, and no doubt about it. And it's rough when you think about they're in this weird purgatory. Kyler Murray is going to be out for a big chunk of the year. Maybe there's some advancement of medical technology and he's back sooner, but I would assume he's going to be out maybe for a large chunk. Who knows? Yes. It could be all, because at what point do you say, well, we don't want to bring him back for this? Right. So, man, the Cardinals are in a rough spot where they're going to have some weird quarterback, whoever that's going to be, just starting most of the year in this new era, this new regime with a new GM, new head coach. Man, it's an odd place to be, and, man, it'll be tough. But, hey, who knows? We just talked about the quarterbacks, or maybe lack thereof in this class, the Drake Mays, the Caleb Williams of the world. If you just dive on the grenade in 2023, maybe it all works out in the end. It's a pot of luck at the end of the rainbow.
You definitely never know, but it's probably going to be a long year in the desert to get to that point for sure. Well, I can't wait for the people to start saying, oh, Arizona's tanking. That'll be around the next corner. You wait and see. I got news for you. Nobody's tanking, Paul. They're not tanking. We can stop. Everybody's trying their butts off to win every week.
100%. That's a tired old narrative that I'm sure we definitely won't see for Arizona in 2023. I'm sure no one will bring that up.
Yeah,
but Randy, a week out from the draft, brother, the next time we chat, face-to-face, camera here, we're going to be on draft day, and I can't even imagine what that show's going to look like. We're going to have a lot of live, crazy action, of course, diving through whatever the heck is happening at the time. So, Randy, I'm very much looking forward to it. It's been a fun show this entire offseason and however long we've been doing this, but, man, there'll be nothing like draft day next week. It's going to be special.
Very fortunate to be on here with you, Paul. Can't wait till next week. Love the draft, and we'll have a lot of strategy to talk about and a few projections as well. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. As always, make sure you like the video, hit subscribe to Front Office View, and make sure you enjoy it. We'll see you next week for Draft Day, baby. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.